principal and administrator at the Hebrew Academy Community School, Hacks, in Margate, Florida. He has written on the subject. We've talked about it and met on the subject. He's spoken on the subject. And the purpose is, after Rabbi Botwinick presents, there should be a good discussion on all topics. No holds barred, and we're not going to tape it. So we'll take it from there. So, Reb Chaim, it's all up to you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi Kaplan. First of all, I appreciate the fact that you're giving me an opportunity to speak with colleagues around the country, many of whom may know, in fact, a little bit more than I do. I think I'm just the lucky one that was selected to facilitate the conversation, so I sincerely appreciate it. What I'd like to do is begin with some salient components of what to expect during the first week of school, as I'm sure you're all very eager to embark on that first week. And then I'd like to start on the macro, and then maybe drill down on the micro, and then we'll open it up for discussion. There really is a lot to impart. It's not so pashut in terms of what does it mean to open up the first week of school during a pandemic after months of very significant planning that all of us have been involved in at to various degrees. Some of us are opening up in a traditional sense in terms of in-person, bricks and mortar. Others are opening up remote, and then obviously there are others that are blended. Most of my remarks today will focus on the traditional, although we will be focusing on the remote because there are a sizable number of kids who have opted, whose parents have opted for remote alternatives. So as administrators and as leaders, as I indicated, much of what I have to share with you are items and challenges that you're all familiar with. Most of you have had scenario planning for your task forces, and the way in which we're positioned to open up this week, next week, etc., is really based in part on all those protocols, guidelines, etc., that were developed and approved by you and your task forces. I'm hopeful that by the end of today's session, we'll be able to have at least a few takeaways, a few chidushim, and if not chidushim, at least things that we need to think about as we embark upon the first day of school. What I'd like to do is really begin with a very short story, which I hopefully will set the stage. And for those of you who have heard the story, please excuse the redundancy, and please, I beg your indulgence. So there's a story about a crossing guard, who's at a rail station, and his job was whenever a train was coming at night, he would take a lantern and wave the lantern to ensure that that people would see the crossing, and that to alert people to the fact that the train was on its way. Well, unfortunately, he did all those things that he needed to do, and there was a carriage that went by with 4 or 5 people. Unfortunately, the train went into them, and they were terribly injured. Baruch Hashem, they were not seriously injured, but it was enough for the townspeople to take this crossing guard to court. He's in court, and the judge says, "Explain to me exactly what you did." And the fellow says, "Well, I heard the train coming, as I always do. I put on my hat, I put on my jacket, as I always do. I ran out to that intersection, as I always do, and I took the lantern, and I started waving the lantern back and forth so that people would be able to see that a train was coming." And all of a sudden, there was silence, and then they're thinking to themselves, "Was schlecht, he did exactly what he should have done." And all of a sudden, the prosecuting attorney says, "Mr. So-and-so, you did everything you can do, but tell me, that lantern that you were waving back and forth, did you light that candle light before you were waving it back and forth?" And all of a sudden, he broke down, he started crying. He says, "That's exactly what I forgot to do. All the preparation, but I forgot to light that canister." Said nobody saw it. So I did all the things I needed to do, but nobody saw that detail, which would have prevented this accident. So what's the mashal? I think the mashal is very, very, very obvious. That we can engage in all the planning processes. We can have all the preparation in the world. We could buy tons of plexiglass. We could buy millions of gallons of sanitary liquid. But at the end of the day, if there's an inability to execute effectively as senior leaders, as managers, unfortunately, it'll be for naught. 85% of strategic plans in corporate America fail for one reason and one reason only: the inability to execute, the inability to have an action plan that will take all the planning that went into the challenge and move it into implementation. So we can have all the scenarios, as I indicated, CDC guidelines, which we distributed and we understood, processing, sharing of people, etc. But we really do not have, and this is new for all of us, nobody on this chat has ever had this experience. When you really think about the awesome, historical, epic proportion of this conversation, nobody has had this conversation in the middle of such a pandemic, except maybe somebody who may have had it in the corner of a room someplace 100 years ago during the first pandemic. So we will really not know the implications of what the first week of opening school is until it's actualized in real time. So up until now, we're doing a lot of planning. We're doing a lot of conversation, as we should be. But there's nothing like actually jumping into it. And if we were to have this conversation a week from Monday, then I think the conversation would be a little different. This is the first time for everybody. The guiding assumption I'd like to present, which flows throughout everything that we do as practitioners, as leaders, is that practice does make permanent. Not perfect, because there's no such thing as perfection. But the more we do dry runs, for some of us, we still have time to do it. For some of us, are up until school's opening. The more we do dry runs, practice drills, it can never be overestimated or overstated that these are critical exercises to ensuring, as much as we possibly can, the successful implementation of week one. Carpool arrival, carpool dismissal, how we serve breakfast, how we serve lunch. Are we going to have a PE? If we have a PE, how will it happen? Where will it happen? Davening, what will davening look like? How are we going to monitor masks? How are we going to monitor 6 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, whatever your distance criteria is going to be? Assemblies. Are we ready to embark on assemblies, or are we going to scratch them for the year? And if we embark on them, how are they going to happen? Where are they going to happen? Verbringen, where will they happen? How will they happen? How are we going to maintain the safety of our children in moving these initiatives forward? Ongoing parent communication is going to be absolutely paramount. As much as we may be somewhat concerned about the health, not somewhat, about the health and safety of our children, alachas kama v'kama, every parent that made a decision, a conscious decision to send their children to your school, to our school, is doing this with tremendous angst. We're not talking about risk elimination. We're talking about risk reduction. We can never eliminate risk. What I'd like to suggest is, before we even begin school, please make sure that all of your student rosters are 100% up to date. All the data, emails, telephone numbers, contact people, all of your files are up to date. Allergies, medications. If we do this during normal times, alachas kama v'kama, we need to do this now. We need to have files that are up to date and they're just ready to be pulled and looked at, and we really have a clear picture in terms of the matzav of the child as well as the contact for the family. Finally, we need to be accessible as menahalim, as administrators, as executives. We need to be accessible 24/6. We cannot afford to be in our offices. We have to be out there in the school, in the classrooms, in the playground, wherever school is happening. We need to be there for two reasons. Number one, we need to be visible. Visibility is absolutely essential. Obviously, there'll be times where we're going to have meetings in rooms 100%. But the fact that we are visible sends out two very important messages, or does two important things. Number one, it tells your chevra, our chevra, it tells staff, it tells teachers that we are out there with you in running the school. And it also informs them that we're seeing what's going on and we're hearing what's going on. Sitting in an office will never accomplish that objective. We have to be real time where the action is in terms of school. We all know that there are many rabbeim, there are many faculty, especially some of the veteran teachers and rabbeim, may feel somewhat more vulnerable than others. And we all know, although we're not talking about it, and we don't talk about it publicly, we all know that a lot of our faculty have returned for parnasa. Obviously, there is a passion to teach. There's a passion to reopen school. But teachers and rabbeim need parnasa. I'm not going to get into a whole conversation about how that happens, when it happens, what happens if a teacher does not come back, etc. Concerted efforts must be made on the part of leadership, on the part of us as a chevra, individually and collectively, to be a support system for our teachers and for our rabbeim. We have to be their sounding board. We have to be the shoulder that they worry on, the shoulder that they cry on. We have to give them chizuk. We can never underestimate the power of the administrator in giving chizuk to every member of staff during a time of vulnerability. And indeed, this is a time of vulnerability. Some of us are reopening with tremendous relief. Some of us are reopening with major concern. I would venture to say that most of us are opening with a combination of the two. Implementation and oversight. As much as we had task forces who were responsible for ensuring the safety and viability and health of schools when we reopen, I'd like to suggest that each one of us also have an implementation committee or an implementation task force. It doesn't lav dafka have to be the same people, but there should be a body of people who will be able to oversee what we're doing and how we're doing it. We'll talk in a minute about what does it mean to establish a management team that will be responsible first tier for those things. There are going to be times when we're going to see things during the first week, probably the first couple of days, that are going to require major modification. That is one of the advantages for having a staggering opening, because after day one, we'll be able to do a cheshbon in terms of what went well, what did not go well, what needs to be eliminated, and what we need to do better in order for day two to be more matzliach than day one, and day three better than day two. So the whole chokhmah in staggering is not only about ensuring that we're not overwhelmed with hundreds of kids coming to school after being away since Pesach. It's also about giving the administration, giving the leadership an opportunity to recalibrate what we think will be a smooth opening. Halavai, we should all have a smooth opening. The management team is going to be critically important for this. And what do I mean by the management team? Those people who are at the top of your management pyramid, decision-making pyramid on the professional level, your principals, the head of school, your director of finance, your administrator, executive director, these are the people that need to come together. I would venture to say, I know this sounds very ambitious, every single day at the end of school, at least for the first week, they should come together and to chazer over exactly what took place during that day. Again, what were the items that went smoothly? What were those protocols that were rough around the edges? Where do we need to modify and change? I don't think it's too much, and I don't mean to sound too bold to suggest that a half hour to an hour at the end of every day to review what took place during that day would be too much, at least for the first week or two. I think it's critically important, especially since all of us are going to be having a very watchful eye, especially for behaviors on the part of our kids. When we begin to think, and we just heard yesterday a world-renowned psychologist talk about trauma, what it means for kids to re-enter into normal or new normal situations. We don't know what to expect. Some of these kids, this is the first time they're coming back to school since Pesach. This is the first time their mom is seeing their friends. Yes, some of them were fortunate to go to camp, but the whole environment of a school is entirely different. We need to be very mindful of that, and we need to be very, very circumspect in terms of how that's going to happen. The whole idea of social distancing is so foreign to children. Baruch Hashem, those of you who have had camps, in our school is one of them that had a summer program, we began to see, almost in a laboratory session as to how kids maintain distance from one another. It is extremely difficult. It runs against the teva of kids to stay a distance, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet from each other, especially after they haven't seen each other for such a long period of time. This is going to be a monumental undertaking on the part of faculty to ensure that social distancing is adhered to throughout the school day, which is not a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour episode. This is from early morning, this is through davening, throughout the day until dismissal at the end of the day, whenever your dismissal takes place. The wearing of masks, a very significant challenge. According to most of the experts, students should not be taking off masks in a classroom. Pshita kamashmo. Do they need mask breaks? Sure they do. Outside, Baruch Hashem, is the place for mask breaks to happen. I'm not going to get into that whole discussion because then it gets into a whole shaklatataria in terms of what is a break, what is not a break, how much plexiglass a student is surrounded with when he or she does take off a mask. The safest is that the mask has to be worn in the classroom. Mask breaks happen outside. Ventilation, critically important. I hope and I trust that your schools have had ventilation checks, whether it be air conditioning systems, AVAC systems, whether they be heating systems, whatever. There's a whole body of literature and there's a whole body of experience in terms of new kinds of HEPA filters that are now being installed in order to ensure that viruses are filtered in the way they should be. There's a whole body of evidence that's now being released that suggests that a lot of the droplets are in fact airborne and that we have to do everything we possibly can in order to mitigate it. The most important thing that I could say, that I could share as a chaver b'avodah, as a colleague, as a leader colleague, is don't get stressed. You need to take a deep breath and say, yes, you may be seeing things that are not the way they should be going. You step back and then you try and deal, you try to mitigate it, and you try to correct it. We have to remember that we're not doing this in a vacuum. Teachers are observing how leadership responds to crisis. That's the whole concept of purposeful leadership. We need to model everything that we do, everything from wearing masks in our offices when sometimes there's a tendency to take it off when nobody's looking, to ways in which we put out fires, lahavdil, or deal with other kinds of crises. Leadership leads, and this is the time to do that. All policies, protocols must be shared with faculty and parents ahead of time. If it hasn't been already shared, it must be shared as soon as possible. Conversations with faculty, as it is said, and dry runs in terms of drills are absolutely essential. And the management team needs to take on a all hands on deck attitude in terms of what needs to happen. There are essentially 5 basic challenges in summary. One is that we need to prepare the school facility. We're not going to get into a discussion of what that means. That train, I hope, left the station already. So for those of you who are responsible for running your schools, hopefully you have those safeguards and materials in place. You have to create and communicate a social distancing plan, which I hope is now in place. You have to promote staff and student sanitation and hygiene, which will be an ongoing challenge for all of us and for our faculty. You have to monitor staff and student health, provide enhanced learning support, which we'll talk about in a minute, because sometimes we get so hung up in the physicality of what it means to open school. Sometimes we forget that at the end of the day, we're here to be mechanech kids. We have to be concerned about the quality, quantity, scope, and nature of the education that they're getting in Limudei Kodesh and in Limudei Chol. And at the end of the day, we also never have to create an emergency plan for future outbreaks and unanticipated spikes if chas v'shalom that happens. So let's take students first. One of the most critical aspects of working with students in anticipation of students coming back to school is placement and leveling. We have to make sure that students, new students for sure, but students b'chlal are placed in classroom environments that are commensurate with their academic performance. Obviously, third graders go into third grade, fourth grade go into fourth graders, etc. in fourth grade. But we also need to be very, very conscious of the fact that there are kids, probably more kids than prior to this pandemic, or at least during this spring, who have slipped, who require remediation, who require special attention. I cannot, again, overemphasize enough the fact that we need a safety net for these children, whether it's through special remediation, whether it's through special tutoring, whether it's through other kinds of services that you have available. Testing these kids would probably be the gold standard to test them at the beginning of the year. We hope, Amir Tashem, at our school to test for math, to see where the skill levels are for kids throughout all of our grades. We need to be concerned about psychological, emotional concerns. Baruch Hashem, we have a counselor and we have a psychologist that we're working with. I think it's going to be critically important for us to make sure that the psychological, social, emotional welfare of our students is top on our radar. Attendance is an unbelievable indicator as to how things are going at home, whether it be socially or health-wise. We need to make sure that attendance is taken every day. And if we see any gaps in that attendance, we have to jump right into it. And then finally, engagement. We are informing all of our teachers that they have to try and engage our kids in the most natural way possible. Yes, we're wearing masks. Yes, we're wearing shields. Yes, people are sitting behind plexiglass. But over a period of time, kids are resilient. They will get used to those kinds of strange environments, at least the kids from grades 3 and above. 2, 1, kindergarten, nursery. When you see an adult in a mask, or even when you're forced to wear a mask, it is somewhat daunting. The preparation and support of teachers is going to be critical. We're spending an inordinate amount of our time making sure that there are lesson plans, that there are unit plans ready to go. Does that necessarily mean that during the first week of school, if you were to do an observation in a classroom, hypothetically speaking, that you're going to see every shtit and fit happening according to plan? Absolutely no. It's not realistic. It's going to take days for kids just to acclimate to a new sviva, to a new environment, to standards, to rules, to regulations, to how they're eating lunch in their classroom, to ways in which they need to go up and down the stairs, how they need to line up, how they need to wash in the morning, how they need to daven, etc. Clear and concise curricular goals for our teachers are going to be critically, critically important. Student expectations. If there are kids who do require modification, they need to be discussed between teachers. This week, we're facilitating those conversations between our faculty. Professional development, which doesn't happen the first week of school, but professional development is going to be a critically important dimension to what it means for us to reopen school over the next couple months. Teachers are going to need the type of support that they require and that they should get in order to be the best that they could be given today's environment. That's either relating to pedagogy and or the use of technology for those who are working remotely. Clinical supervision and feedback, it's going to be absolutely essential for the directors, for the principals, for the heads of schools to give as much feedback as possible to our teachers, but yet being very sensitive the first couple of weeks as to how to give that feedback. We're not looking for snoopervision, we're looking for supervision. And I think that's a critically important dimension. Let's jump now into parents. ongoing communication with parents is going to be absolutely essential from day one. I would suggest that after the first day of school, we get a communication out to parents, informing them, the Mirza Shem, how successful day one was, or after day two, or after day three, whenever we decide we're going to open school, and the nature of the staggering. Daily and weekly reports is upgraded. We should definitely do daily, weekly reports. Parents are going to be starving for information, timely information. Full transparency is going to be the name of the game for all of us. Again, we need to be out there during carpool. We need to have parents see us as leaders, as administrators. Let's make sure that carpool in the morning and carpool in the afternoon, that we do not schedule any appointments at that time. Even if it means standing there and waving hello to parents. Parents obviously need to stay in the car, and we still need to wear masks. But our presence is going to be critical, and it's going to be very, very important. We need to provide parents with chizuk. They are sending their kids to us with great trepidation, but they are entrusting us, and we owe it to them to give them that chizuk and that reassurance that we ensure their safety, their health, and a nurturing environments. The administration and office staff. Everybody in the office staff, from the bookkeeper to the person who's the first line in the front office or even back office, need to be familiar with all the guidelines, processes, and protocols. Unfortunately, although we did say over a couple of days you could modify things, but unfortunately sometimes there are no do-overs. The way in which we begin the school that first week is almost the indicator as to how the rest of the year is going to go. Sure, what happens over a normal period of time is that people get used to it. Either they become more lax or they become more stringent. What we're looking for is regularity. We're looking for consistency. We're looking for clear understanding in terms of what the goals and what the objectives are. I would like to request that, or suggest, that administrators keep a log, a personal and professional log of observations. What they see, when they see what they see, and how to improve on what they see. These logs are going to be unbelievably important as we begin to recall at the end of the day what we saw, what we didn't see, what we could be seeing. And this takes place throughout the entire week. That, again, that first week of operation is going to be critical. Visitors in and out, that's entirely up to your protocols. We are not only minimizing visitors in and out of our school and campus, but in order to come onto our campus, you actually need an appointment. Masks, we talked about. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to have to do that. The one area I do not hear schools talking about, although inherently it may be very much part of their agenda, is security. Security, Chevra, is going to be a big deal. As schools begin to reopen, they become vulnerable, and vulnerability creates easy targets. And if we think that people out there who have schools as targets are not looking at when we reopen, we're making big mistakes. Please don't let up on security. If anything, adarabah, security needs to be tightened up. We need all hands on deck. Encourage administrative staff to inform the head of school, the principal, any concerns, irregularities, areas that warrant special attention. This, again, this is not about being overly concerned. This is about mitigating potential problems. Health and safety, we talked a little bit about it. I mean, whether or not you have a number of people who are taking temperatures, not taking temperatures in the morning, and how many people, you all should be taking temperatures, but it also depends on the size of your school in terms of who's going to be doing this. I think throughout the day, it really behooves all of us, no matter what position we are, to actually visit bathrooms, take a look at the bathrooms. Are the soap dispensers still full? Are the sanitizers still full? Is this the place where you would want your child to do their business? I think it's really important. It is not beneath any of us to do this. This is about the health and concern of our children. Students should not be permitted, although something very simple as a child brings in a bag of popcorn or a bag of potato chips, and I was speaking to some teachers from another school, and they said, so what's wrong? You can bring your own snacks. Yes, you could bring your own snacks, but how many of our kids share snacks? How many of our kids will open up the bag and give a chaver? So like first dibs to just put their hand in it. We have to be very vigilant. We have to keep our eyes and we have to have our ears open. How you mitigate the use of your water fountains is going to be critically important. We are suggesting that everybody bring a water bottle, and we have special types of fountains that will be used for water bottles only. I know this is getting down to the nitty-gritty, but it's the nitty-gritty that usually makes for the viability of a first week of opening. High touch surfaces, there's a whole discussion about what is high touch, what is not high touch. I'm sure you've done enough research in terms of how your kids are going to be playing at a playground, the use of a gym, what does that mean, etc. All these things I think need to be addressed before the first week, because we need to be very vigilant that first week. We need to make sure that all the planning, I know I sound very redundant and I'm going to continue to sound redundant, all the planning that went into the opening of school needs to be realized in real time. And there are not enough eyes to ensure that that's happening. Just imagine a teacher who has not gone through this drill before, who has to manage 15, 16, 17 kids in the morning to wash their hands before davening. How's that going to happen? We do know that we are going to take temperature checks before a child leaves the car, but then they have to be directed to a washing station. Who's going to supervise the washing station? How are we going to make sure that there's not going to be any bottlenecking or backing up of students, especially if we're very serious and diligent about social distancing? The one thing to keep in mind, again, and I sound like a broken record, kids will be kids. We're not going to modify behavior within a week or two. It's going to take a process, and it has to happen calmly, smoothly, in a way that kids will embrace over a period of time, that this is the way in which school is going to operate, at least for the foreseeable future, at least in Mirz Hashem, until we're able to mitigate this entirely. One more word about physical plant, and then I want to get into academics briefly. Sometimes when we buy supplies, we think, oh, we bought the supplies, now we have enough. Never underestimate not only the amount of supplies that you're going to need, but think about it from the vendor's perspective. The same way in which we are contacting vendors for materials, so are hundreds and thousands of other schools nationally. There is such a thing as vendors running out of stock. You do not want to put yourself in that position. You probably want to stock up as much as possible on all of these consumables, whether it's soap, paper, etc. Academics. It's going to be critically important to develop a schedule, and we all realize that scheduling of classes is going to be an unbelievable tircha for those groups that are developing those schedules. This is not an easy task, because we have to make sure that the schedules meet the number of staff that we have, whatever mix of Limudei Kodesh and Limudei Chol you have. For those of you who are fortunate to have all of your Rebbeim and teachers coming back, Yasher Koyach. For a lot of schools that do not, there is a personnel crisis. There is going to have to be some level of mitigation that we're going to have to do, the schools have to do, in order to make up for this paucity or unfortunate loss of teachers. And when I say loss of teachers, by design, not by default. There are teachers who have made very conscious decisions given pre-existing conditions or given the fact that they may have an elderly spouse or an elderly person living, or just somebody who's more vulnerable, not to expose themselves to a school environment. And I get it, and I think we all get it, and we respect it. It's heart-wrenching, because some of these teachers, most of these teachers are outstanding teachers, but nebuch, they have to do what's in their best interest. I think the provision of extensive remediation, tutoring, and special academic programming is going to be critical. Unfortunately, what's happened in the United States, unfortunately, is sometimes the safety net does not always exist for these kids during times of crises. We have to remember that the longer we do not provide these kids with services, the more they're going to slip. Concerted efforts need to be made to test these kids to make sure that they are being paired now with professionals who will help remediate any deficiencies that they have. Because we cannot afford 1 month to go by after reopening for us to have any more slippage. I think that's going to be critically important. And not only is it going to be critically important for the students, it's also going to be critically important for faculty as well. I can go on for quite a while. I'm just going to defer to Rabbi Kaplan to see whether or not we want to open it up for some discussion, for ideas, or should I continue with some of the other salient features that I have to present? So I leave it entirely up to you, Rabbi Kaplan, as to how you'd like to proceed at this stage. Or if you want, what we could do is we could open it up. I know that everybody should have chat capacity on their on whatever device they're using. If you want to sort of like ask questions either live or depending on how we want to moderate this, or if you just want to send up the question on the screen, I'll repeat the question and then we can have the conversation.
So I guess by default, I ended up as the moderator.
Right.
My father walked out and dropped it on me. I think we're a small enough group that we can actually talk to each other.
Okay, excellent.
And I think that would be, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with a question that I have.
Please,
okay.
Absolutely.
We are meeting with our security team. And of course, the security team is only thinking security. And our health team is only thinking health. And then we're in the middle. We have to both think about security as well as health. And so I'm sure many schools have created systems where they have safe rooms, and they have rooms they have to walk to and run to. And I'm wondering if anybody has an ideas of how they're going to begin these drills. Of course, with everyone wearing masks, the flow of students walking through the hallways, opening doors, and so on and so forth. Because everything seems to break every rule that we say that we want to take care of during this time. So I'd love to hear some thoughts of anybody who has gone through this and has any ideas.
It's an excellent point. So I'll leave it up for conversation. Crickets.
That doesn't sound very good.
I think probably, without being overly bold, I think probably one of the reasons why you're not hearing a lot of responses, I think, without sounding pretentious, is because I don't think we've thought about it to the extent that we should. And Pshita Kamashmo, you know, when you think about, or just the enormity of the task, what does it mean for us to do so like drills when we're maintaining social distancing, when we're having masks, etc. We're having that conversation at our school, I think either this afternoon or tomorrow, in terms of how to do that. Because if we're serious about security, we have to be prepared. So you're 100% on target. Yeah. But that doesn't help. You're looking for answers. You could have said exactly what I just said.
You know, if Chas v'Shalom there was an emergency, you know, you drop everything and you drop all precautions and there you go. We're talking about regular drills. You're talking about monthly drills, every 2 months, you know, and the idea is to get the children used to it. So they're not very good at dropping everything and then coming back and going right back where they started.
That's true. I think it's probably going to be a lot easier to do fire drills than lockdown drills. Like
because
fire drills outside, everybody knows. We've gone through the drill figuratively and literally in terms of how kids need to line up. Obviously, teachers are going to have to make sure that the students maintain distance, but we know where to go and how to do it. The lockdown drill is a big issue. Where do kids go? How do they go? Maybe we need, I'm just thinking out loud, different locations for kids. Although I'm not sure you want to have kids running out of a classroom and going to a different location when the kids have to go to a back of a classroom and draw down the shades and get locked down. So it's really, it's a daunting challenge. It's a daunting challenge. Yeah.
See, here are some thoughts I had. Just,
please.
And I'm thinking aloud as we speak.
Yes.
That perhaps we scale back our drills, which means we want the kids to be alert. We want them to recognize the different drill calls. I'm sure everyone has their own protocols when it comes to drill calls. Some of them, of course, is a lockdown. A lockdown is really not much of a problem because they're in their cohorts anyway, so they're within their classrooms. And by doing so, all you're doing is reinforcing the idea of being within your classroom. Lockdowns can be done, and it opens the idea that they can recognize the drill signal. So if you have different drill signals, lockdown is something that's easy. Shelter in place is something that's easy. A drill for a missing child, that's something that's easy. The relocate is really the problem because we have a bomb drill that in case there is a threat, where would we relocate? And my thought here is that maybe we actually canceled those initial drills at the beginning of the year because there's two parts how I see it. There's many parts, but there's two primary parts to the drills. One is to have the children alert to the idea of drills, and the other is the specifics within the drill itself. If we can at least have part of the drills being done regularly, so at least the idea of drills and to recognize the symbols, can continue and to be maintained. And quite frankly, shelter in place, right, is probably the strongest and most urgent. The others, like relocate, is when you have time. So if you didn't have that in process and instead you went to shelter, it doesn't hurt. Which means shelter in place or lockdown in the classroom is actually not so. It's doing a little further. It's being more strict than you have to be. But at least you know that if something happens, they'll know what to do within their classrooms. Locking the doors, moving to spots, sitting down, whatever it might be. So it's true that if someone in the community had a problem, you would say, let's relocate. I don't know if you're hearing me double, but I heard. Anyway, so I think maybe we scale back our drills, but continue the drills because we're keeping them updated to the idea of drills, and we're taking the most extreme case into play. A bomb threat is that's relocating, but I guess that's my thought right now. That's what I'm going to bring up with my team.
I think it's a great approach. I think in the absence of any other viable approaches, I think what you say really makes sense. It really does.
And in some way, I don't know what other schools are doing, but I'm sure most of us are only allowing staff in the building. So that itself is actually something that's helping security because now we're monitoring every child coming in. We're doing a screening in the morning. And by doing so, you're actually upping the security. What you need to think then is, more vigilance outside. And the other thing is that even if you are not into having visibility of somebody there, because the morning process is probably going to take so much longer, it'd be probably worth it to have a security guard, even for that hour when the children are arriving, because it's no longer out of your car and into the building. There's probably some sort of process that's happening. So if you had to spend the money and you don't have a lot of it, maybe that first hour would be really important to have someone around.
I think that's spot on. Baruch Hashem, I don't want to toot our horn, Bli Ayin Hara, Baruch Hashem, we have a security guard who's mamish there during school opening, carpool, and for sure is there at the end of the day. So, but what you say really makes tremendous sense, really.
Another thought, I'm not going to hog it, but just throw out some thoughts here, is that if you don't have speed bumps that you put up, it's not very difficult to purchase speed bumps. And because the drop off is probably going to work at a slower pace, it might be worth it to invest now in having that to slow people down, because it's going to be a little freak. Imagine the parent that's waiting 10 minutes till someone takes their child out of that car. The frustration is going to grow, and that's where the person's going to zoom off which makes it a little more dangerous as they come in and out. Anyway, thoughts?
Good.
Yeah, hi.
If anybody, jump in.
Heard. So I mean, the thought that I'd love to ear out and get some feedback, hopefully with as much or more participation Rabbi Kaplan got, was the I hope, at least my perception is that there will be many times throughout this situation we're living in where we will be receiving information, developments either related to our school specifically or just the general community, or even, I mean, there's just at times news articles that present themselves or can be perceived by us as like a crisis, kind of to really have very specific steps that we do when we think there's new information on the table. So what we have said at our school is there's 3 specific people. Whenever there's quote unquote new information, we jump on a Zoom call and we have 3 questions we ask ourselves to determine has the data actually changed? Most often it has not, but if it has, what does that mean for us? And very often, just because we're so involved in the school and just the anxiety level of even the administrators, we have 2 associated schools that run completely independently, but our safety plans are intertwined. So we would right away reach out to have the administrators of all 3 schools talk, just to kind of gain perspective.
Just a thought to that. I'm sure everybody's setting up some sort of medical board, advisory board. When we reached out to our advisory board, their parents and doctors, I said the purpose is not for you to make the decisions; it's for you to read the papers. I said we're reading stories, and you're reading the data, and we need doctors to help us parse, amongst all the stories and say, well, what's real, who's accurate, which website should I be looking at, and if there's data coming in from different areas, if you read it as a doctor, what do you feel?
Right. So just to clarify, I'm using data as just literally, as in new information. So it could be that a local preschool had a positive case that may have connection. There's a shoal. So that's what I mean by data, not like scientific data, but there's going to be constant decisions that have to be made, and the decision could be
Correct.
to do nothing. Decisions regarding communication, like what do you say? How do you just in planning for school are
Rabbi Bassman, I think we're losing you, or I'm losing you.
panicked.
I can't hear you. I'm not sure if others can hear you.
Can't hear. But I think what the rabbi was saying, I think, is an important dimension to the way in which we hear and communicate. As diverse and as large of a network of schools that we are, we live in communities. And could you hear?
Group of people are our teachers, some that are still with us. I could hear you, yes.
Yeah, but we don't hear you though.
We don't hear.
Oh, I stopped talking because of that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so that's what you said.
No, I just was my first point to Rabbi Kaplan was I wasn't referring to scientific data. I was referring to using the word data as it relates to just new information,
community,
new cases in the community, and having like, what do we do now? is, I think, critical, so that you don't have to think on your feet. I mean, you'll have to, in the end of the day, you will have to think, but just what do we do when we think there may be new data that needs perhaps action?
So I think that's an important.
I mean, just the other piece that we're doing here in Milwaukee, one of the only K through 12 systems that are doing this. Yeah, I stopped talking. Continue. So the other piece I was just going to share, and we've purchased our own spit test machine. So we initially were going to be doing mandated weekly testing for all staff and students. We're now doing daily pod testing. I guess if anybody is interested in hearing more about that, they could definitely reach out to me. But it's what the NBA does. I mean, it's what I think is our most powerful risk mitigation, to actually be able to detect a virus quickly.
Right. And how accurate is that testing? You know the NFL story from yesterday, right?
How accurate? It's many times more accurate than not testing.
Right,
but
that's true.
I think it's about 95%. It's the most accurate machine on the market. I mean, we're working closely with a clinic here we're working closely.
What is it called? What is it called?
So the device that we were going to purchase is the one that I know of. We were going to be purchasing the Sophia 2. But this new spit test is out of the University of Michigan. But I have not been. So it's going to be on site at our middle school, where I'm involved with the high school, and we would be transporting our saliva daily to that. And if there's a pod that has, but it's, I mean, we're doing science. Where there's a microbiologist who is writing a paper comparing our schools to a controlled group. But I think it's about $30,000, $35,000. Some of it will be covered by both grants. I mean, it's not something that I'm leading. It's Rabbi Schmatkin here.
Very cool.
It's great.
So look. So here's the question. When you have and I think it's a great idea to reach out to other schools, just because you're hearing, you're not living in a vacuum or in an echo chamber and you're just hearing yourselves talk. The question though becomes when it becomes political and the other schools in the area might be in different political persuasion. I guess what are your thoughts about that? Because what happens is we become competitive. We're two schools in one area, and I'm surprised that they're still open.
So what I'd like to do is maybe give this maybe an apolitical response. I mean, I can give the political response, so I'm going to give the apolitical. I think whenever we hear information, especially social data as opposed to scientific data, I think we probably need to use our own filters. Because obviously there's always political innuendo. If you hear about a school that has had some community spread, then we'd want to find out how did that happen without jumping through hoops and loops and saying, oh my God, like Chas v'shalom, we're going to be the next. I mean, we have to be really, really super careful. If there's a school that's not requiring masks for whatever reason, then we also need to look at it circumspect in terms of, is this necessarily the standard that we would want to adhere to. So again, I keep on using the term filter because that's probably the only way that I would be able to take any action or interpret data that is so subjective. It's not like this happened in a lab and these are the test results. This is based on what we're hearing in the community. This is it can be based on things going on in the shul. It could be based on other things in the community. It could be based on a competitor who's in the community, etc. So at best, what I would suggest is just looking these things through different lenses and also through a filter. I mean, Baruch Hashem, I mean, here in the community, I don't want to give ourselves an ayin hara, but, good news usually travels very, very fast, and as it does in every community. And if things were to happen in one particular neighborhood versus another, we would probably hear about it. We probably would not overreact, but we would probably look at it circumspect and say, how nogeya is it to our school? And I think that's probably the best way to get through the day. Otherwise, Mekem Shugaverin, in terms of trying to figure out what is nogeya, what is not nogeya, what's political, what's apolitical, what's embedded in a hashkafa versus non-hashkafa, what's halachic, what's not. So then, Eino Davrosov, as opposed to, this is what we heard, we're taking advisement, and then we'll make our own decision, as opposed to there being a klal based on what people do when they hear about data.
Right. Okay. Reasonable.